Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be making my 2020 NHL trade deadline predictions. Now this year's NHL trade deadline is officially 1 week away and we've already seen some pretty big trades, guys like Jason Zucker, Blake Coleman now recently, but the best is yet to come and will come in the next few days. But which players do I see being traded in the next week and where do I see the big stars going at this year's trade deadline? Watch till the end for all my picks and predictions, and of course hit that subscribe button if you're new. Now this year's NHL trade deadline I think is going to be very interesting. I don't think it's going to be absolutely insane. We're not going to see 1,000-star players traded obviously, but I think there'll be a lot of great players going for very high prices. There is a lot of teams wanting not just make the playoffs but to win that Stanley Cup, and a lot of these rentals are going to go for a first-round pick and more. Now with Jason Zucker and now Blake Coleman getting a first-round pick on top of a great prospect, right now the whole market is wide open. Not just for forwards but for everything. And for playoff teams right now, they're going to have to give up that heavy price. And a good example of that is in the Chris Kreider situation. And this is a player that could go anywhere. But again, today I'm predicting where these guys will go, my official predictions. And again, this is also a week before the deadline. A lot is going to change in the next few days, so keep that in mind. But still, in the end, even though there will be a lot of teams interested in Kreider, I think the Boston Bruins will be the main team really going after him and will actually give up the asking price for him. Now, with Jason Zucker getting a first-round pick, a prospect, and the same thing with Blake Coleman, Chris Kreider has always been the big name on the market and is likely to get even more than that. But even though that cost will be pretty high, I think a team like Boston will want to give that up. They want to get that revenge tour, they want to have that Stanley Cup, and they'll have to give up the pieces for that. Now, I think the 2020 first-round pick is a necessity at this point for Kreider. If he's going to get traded, they're going to get a first-round pick back. That's almost automatic, so you don't even have to talk about that. But the players are what's most interesting here because Boston would have to give up a little bit of cap back to New York to make this deal work, even if it is retained as well. A guy like Danton Heinen, I could totally see being a guy New York targets. He's a guy who hasn't had the greatest year but still has a ton of potential. And then you go for a big prospect, I think, in Boston. Maybe a guy like Jacob Luko. At the same time, though, I wouldn't be surprised New York targets a guy as good as Jack Studnicka. Because with the Kreider negotiations, he's the best player on the market right now, and I think deserves that kind of value. But even though the Boston Bruins, I think, will end up with Chris Kreider, there are still a bunch of other fantastic options in the market that could be even better in the playoffs. You've got a guy like Jean-Gabriel Pageau who has had a track record of playoff success. Just look at 2017 where he absolutely dominated. And this is a player who I think will get a ton as well. Maybe even more than Chris Kreider in these negotiations because he is a center and he can play that position very, very well. At the same time, though, I don't think there's going to be a ton of teams after him, but a decent amount of teams that are heavily on him. One of those teams I think will end up getting him, that being the Winnipeg Jets. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Canadian teams to go against each other or trade for each other, and in Winnipeg's case, obviously Ottawa is in the different conference, so that's even more enticing, but Winnipeg has been linked to a bunch of centers recently, and now with Brian Little off injury, a center is almost a need for them at this point. Now, for a team like Winnipeg, I think they would want to go for a cheaper option, but at the same time, with the centers on the market, they're either great like Jean-Gabriel Pageau or like Melker Karlsson, so I don't think Winnipeg can really go all that in between. At the same time, though, Winnipeg will have to get a heavy price for him. I think a 2020 first rounder, a 2020 second rounder, and a prospect like Dylan Sandberg would fit quite well for Ottawa. At the same time, though, again, for a team like Winnipeg, who kind of wants prospects right now, I could see them not wanting to give up that price because it is pretty hefty. But there's still players out there that I think will go untouched and will not end up being traded. One of those guys is Sami Vatanen, and I personally have been on and off the Vatanen train for a while in terms of being traded, but with his recent injury, I think it'll be very hard for New Jersey to find the value they want. They'll probably want a first-round pick on top of a prospect, and with his injury that isn't long-term but is short-term enough to maybe push him outside the trade deadline, that could push a few teams out of the question. But on the different side of the spectrum to players who are soaring in trade value, we now have to look at Tyler Toffoli and where he might go. With his Stadium Series performance where he got a hat trick, the first ever hat trick in an outdoor game, again, the value for Tyler Toffoli is definitely going to be there. At the same time, though, I think that Blake Coleman is really a good trendsetter for Toffoli, and I think the Colorado Avalanche will be the team that ends up trading for him. I know, the team that ended up getting torched by him will end up trading for him, but I think Colorado Colorado makes a lot of sense. I don't think they're really going to go after a defenseman, and I don't think they want to give up a roster defenseman either, but for a team like LA, I don't think that matters too much. Getting that first round pick, though, for Colorado is something that I think they'll want to give up, and in Toffoli's case, would definitely help them. Now, for a team like Colorado, they don't really have too many assets prospect-wise. They're not going to trade Timmins. They're not going to trade Byram. And I think LA would want to get a defensive prospect from them. So I think they would get Josh Anderson, who right now is playing in the ECHL, but could still play a few games for LA for sure. And again, I think that first-round pick is a necessity. I think we could also see for LA, maybe they get a second-round pick and a great prospect. But I think that first-round pick, especially with what Blake Coleman got, is a huge thing for LA and Toffoli right now. But now going on to the center that might be better than Baggio and might rival the value of him, that being Vincent Roadtrek. Now, Roadtrek recently has come under rumors. Right now, Sportsnet Elliot Friedman has both reported that Vincent Roadtrek is on the trade block and that Florida wants to trade him for a defenseman. And this is where my bias comes in, because some of you guys know, obviously, on the channel, the Dallas Stars are my first favorite team. I think in the end, for Dallas, although it might hurt them defensively, I think a Vincent Roadtrek type player would be wonderful for Dallas and would fix a lot of that consistency issues. Although Roadtrek has his fair share of inconsistency, I think a guy like that as that second line center would help a ton. Now, there's not too many fantastic options for Roadtrek because in the end, I think Florida, again, wants a big defenseman who can play in the NHL now and be a big guy for them, but I think Dallas has the assets for that. In a trade like that, I think Dallas would give up a guy like Jamie Oleksiak, a 2020 first rounder, and a 2020 third rounder. Again, you also got to remember that Roadtrek has multiple years after this and will provide value after the fact too. But I think Jamie Oleksiak would be a great fit for Florida. He's a guy that's pretty much like the 5th or 6th defenseman for Dallas at this point, and now Taylor Fedun coming back from injury, I think Dallas can afford his loss. When you bring a guy like Vincent Roadtrek, albeit not having the greatest season, the offense potential is there, and just pairing him with guys like Roope Hintz and Denis Gurianov and Joe Pavelski, I think would work wonders. Now I'm going to cool the Jets a little bit to a player who I think will stay with their team and not be traded at this deadline. I'm going to go with Matthew Dumba of the Minnesota Wild, and here's why. So, Matthew Dumba has been one of the best defensemen linked to the trade market, but at the same time for many, I don't think it makes sense for them to trade him now. I think an offseason trade would be much better for them, especially if he has a good couple of months to end the season and get off that injury schneid. At the same time, though, Dumba's value is pretty much at an all-time low. To trade him right now, you pretty much given up on him, and I think Matthew Dumba can be better for Minnesota and can get that value back. At the same time, though, I think Minnesota is worrying a lot more about getting rid of Brodin at this point, and I think Brodin would have a lot more value too. But even though I think Matthew Dumba will be staying with Minnesota, the next player that I think will be traded will make up for it just a little bit, that being Brandon Saad of the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, the Blackhawks have been a topsy-turvy roller coaster ride. Just like a couple weeks ago, I thought they couldn't make the playoffs. They were playing fantastic. And now they've lost like a bajillion billion games in the past week, and it's just all crumbled for them. Now, they still have a chance to make the playoffs, but at the same time, I think they might be a team like St. Louis back in like 2017, where they're in the playoff race, but still traded Shattenkirk and got a ton of value back. I think for a guy like Brandon Saad, the New York Islanders would be a perfect fit when it comes to defense and systems. I think a guy like Barry Trotz would do wonders with him. At the same time, though, it'll come at a cost because he does come for next season, too. The same situation being like Blake Coleman, even though Saad is a lot more expensive. I think the cost would go for a 2020 first rounder, at least, a defenseman in New York system like Bodie Wild, and potentially even another forward like a Joshua Ho-Sang that New York has pretty much given up on. And I'm actually going to break the streak of defensemen staying with their teams because I ain't having none of that boring stuff. Now we're going to go to Dylan DeMello, who I think will be traded from the Ottawa Senators. And to me, the team that'll end up going for him is the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, initially, I thought maybe Vatanen would be the guy that Vegas ends up going for, and I would love that, to be honest. But at the same time, with those injury woes, I think a team like Vegas is one of those teams that'll be scared off by that. But Dylan DeMello would be an excellent add for that defense, and will make that top 4D of Schmidt, Theodore, McNabb, and Dylan DeMello very scary. Now, for me personally, I don't see DeMello getting a first-round pick. Even with the excellent career year he's having, I'm not sure if he gets that, but I think Ottawa will look for more quantity over quality in this type deal. I think a second-rounder and a third-rounder would be the thing, and also maybe a decent prospect on top of that for a team like Vegas, I'd look at a guy like Dylan Ferguson, goaltending prospect, who's having a pretty solid year. That's a team, though, in Ottawa that kind of needs a goalie of the future, and Ferguson could be that potentially if he's developed right. But now I'm going to return to the New Jersey Devils, and another player that I think will be staying at this deadline is Kyle Palmieri. Now, I thought Kyle Palmieri might have the better chance potentially to be traded than Blake Coleman at first, but now with Blake Coleman gone, I really don't see Palmieri getting traded, at least at this deadline. It might be a draft or off-season trade, but as it stands right now, I think New Jersey will be patient, at least in Palmieri's case. But especially with the Sami Vatanen injury, it makes it a lot more complicated, but I could see New Jersey going either way here. They already traded Blake Coleman, and Palmieri might be the next to go, especially Vatanen if they're not able to trade him. But at the same time, for New Jersey, if they're going to keep anybody, I think it should be Palmieri. He's a guy that could potentially be the captain, potentially be the leader on that team, and will still be pretty good once New Jersey turns around the tide. At the same time, though, Palmieri will be one of the best wingers on this market and will likely get a first-round pick on top of a prospect, and likely more than Blake Coleman did. So if New Jersey gets that type of package, he could be potentially gone. And now for my last two players here today that kind of intersect on each other in the same trade. This is an interesting scenario that I kind of thought of in the last couple of days because it's been floated around as well. Now, this started when Michael Russo was talking about the Matthew Dumba and Jonas Brodin situations, how Minnesota wants to trade Jonas Brodin and wants to get that off the boards, and that Montreal might have interest. Then that article turned into a potential Max Domi situation where Max Domi could end up in Minnesota and Jonas Brodin with the Habs. Now, when I initially saw this article and saw all the speculation, I was like, no. What? Are you kidding me? No, stop this. But as I started thinking about it more, it started to make a little bit more sense. Now, still, I don't think it makes a ton of sense, and it is kind of in crazy land. But for a team like Montreal, who wants to make the playoffs next season, a guy like Jonas Brodin would certainly help. Now with Montreal, if they traded Max Domi like a year ago when they had obvious center issues, or 2 years ago really in 2018, it would have been a lot more of a problem. But now with Montreal, they have Nick Suzuki coming up, Ryan Poehling, and all these guys that will be centers and good ones for Montreal, I think. Max Domi right now will be an RFA after this year, and although I would keep him if I'm Montreal, he could get a lot of value back. And for a guy like Jonas Brodin, who is excellent defensively, that could be just what Montreal needs. Now, personally, I wouldn't see it being a one-for-one trade, but I do see this trade happening. I see a Minnesota-Montreal connection here. Minnesota wanting to get one of their defenders out of the books and take on a guy like Max Domi. It makes sense a ton for Minnesota, too, who really doesn't have any centers for the future. Max Domi is still super young and can be a first-line guy for them if needs be. And I think for Montreal, who has some defensive issues at points, could really use a guy like that. And I think it could potentially happen. This might be a trade that maybe happens in the off season, who knows, but if I am going to predict it, I think a trade like that happens and gets done. I don't think it's going to be one for one, but I could see Minnesota giving up Jonas Brodin, Ryan Donato, and Nico Sturm in a package to get Max Domi at this deadline. But that is it for my predictions here today. Thanks so much for watching, boys. I appreciate it. If you guys have anybody that I missed, let me know down in the comments. I'll let you guys know where I see them. And of course, in the comments down below, let me know what you think of this video. What do you think about my predictions? What do you agree and disagree with? And also, let me know what you think about all the big trade pieces at this deadline and where you see them going. And of course, also, if you haven't already, click this playlist right here to watch all of my NHL trade rumor videos right in one place. And of course, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below all your thoughts as well, and share this video with your friends. Get these predictions out there because they're going to be wrong in probably like 3 days or something. Either way, my name is Nathan. The deadline, please don't be boring. That's all I ask. I'll see you guys next video or stream. Goodbye.